Well, hello, I'm Josh, and I'm back once again with another great film to tell you about. And seeing as we are well into the Christmas season, I thought I'd talk about a Christmas film that is a bit unconventional. In fact, it's a Christmas film noir shot in the first person perspective. That film I'm talking about is Robert Montgomery's 1946 noir, Lady in the Lake. Based on the fourth Philip Marlowe novel by Raymond Chandler, Lady in the Lake follows the great PI who has recently tried his hand at writing his own murder stories. He gets a meeting at Kingsby Publications only to learn that he is actually being hired to locate the boss's wife who has gone missing. A seemingly straightforward task, but like all Chandler stories, the deeper Marlowe gets into the investigation, the more complicated things quickly become. So as I said, this film stars Robert Montgomery, who was a pretty well-known actor in those days, having started out largely in pre-code comedies before really making a name for himself as the suspected serial killer Danny in the 1937 classic Night Must Fall. Even then though, he was still mostly doing comedy roles such as in Alfred Hitchcock's Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Alexander Hall's Here Comes Mr. Jordan, which I have talked about here. But by this point, Montgomery had shown that he had range, and after filling in for John Ford directing a portion of They Were Expendable, he was eager to direct something of his own. And for his first film, he wanted to take on Raymond Chandler's popular detective, Philip Marlowe. So he convinced MGM to get the rights to the most recent Chandler novel, The Lady in the Lake, and they went right to work adapting it. Now by this time, Raymond Chandler had had some previous success in writing screenplays, with Billy Wilder on Double Indemnity and on his own with The Blue Dahlia, both of which were nominated for Oscars. But after Montgomery disliked the script he had turned in for Lady in the Lake, fellow pulp writer Steve Fisher was brought in to rewrite it, resetting the film to occur during Christmas time, which is probably my favorite change he makes from the book, as it puts a nice twist on the usual tenets of the film noir genre, contrasting Montgomery's extra stern portrayal of Marlowe with the naturally happy feelings that the holiday brings. In some ways, it's a sort of precursor to other holiday noirs like Blast of Silence and even more modern films like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which in addition to referencing the title along with a number of other Chandler works, it also has a similar knack for drawing attention to the ironic humor which naturally comes from mixing the noir genre with the Christmas season. For example, the opening credits are printed on these scenic Christmassy postcards, feeling much more like a traditional Christmas film like It's a Wonderful Life or Christmas in Connecticut. That is until the last card is pulled and a gun is revealed on the table. But what really makes this film stand apart from anything else at the time was the fact that it was entirely shot in the first-person perspective, as if we are seeing it through the eyes of Philip Marlowe. The idea came to Montgomery as a way to mimic the first-person narration from the novels. Now, there had been a few other films that had dabbled in shooting first-person, the earliest I can think of being Ruben Mamoulian's 1932 version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and later in 1947, Dark Passage, another classic noir that paired Bogart and Bacall, opened with its own sequence from Bogart's point of view. But to my knowledge, nobody had ever shot an entire movie from this perspective. So this was a very risky endeavor for Montgomery to take on, as it's so different from what people are used to seeing. And on top of the technical challenges of bulky cameras and editing together multiple shots from one perspective, you also can't see the star of the film. And Robert Montgomery was a pretty big star for MGM at the time, and though he eventually convinced them to go through with his idea, he did agree to bookend the film with scenes of him talking to the audience. Now, probably the most interesting thing about this first-person perspective is that it really does feel like you're being transported into a film noir from the 1940s. It has all the hallmarks of a classic noir, and the fact that it's in the first-person perspective almost makes it feel like some sort of limited VR experience. It's very atmospheric. I love all the touches Montgomery adds to the film that makes it feel more like a lived-in world and less like all of these things are being presented to you. For instance, at the police station, everyone is on the phone talking to their loved ones about Christmas. So instead of Marlowe immediately picking up a phone or talking to someone, we have to wait a moment and can choose whether or not we want to listen to what they're saying. Or how about when Marlowe is relaxed in a chair listening to the end of A Christmas Carol broadcast on the radio? It's touches like these, along with the shots resting on empty spaces during phone calls, that would seem more like mistakes in a conventional movie, but simultaneously grounding the world of this film way more than most of the plot-driven scenes do, as the viewer can likely identify with experiencing these things in real life. Oddly enough, this is something we see way more today in video games, as a way to make the world feel more immersive. And though the first-person perspective has certainly become a much more successful tool in video games rather than movies, seeing these kinds of tricks being put to use nearly 80 years ago is still pretty cool. And though it may not be incorporated perfectly here, it still gives the film a lot of charm and certainly makes it an incredibly unique experience.
Oh, brother.
And with this change in perspective, the actors had to also change their approach to acting. And since they were essentially performing directly to the camera, I can only imagine it took some getting used to. Montgomery was often right next to the lens to ensure that the actors had someone to play off of, but they still had to keep eye contact with the camera. And though these all seem like pretty big limitations, the first-person perspective does add a pretty cool level to the mystery element, in that when Marlowe is searching for clues and spying through doorways, we are right there with him, seeing exactly what he sees. And when he's interrogating suspects and talking to the cops, you can often figure out who's lying based on their body language. And the actors actually incorporate some different tics and touches into their performances to help convey this. And though you may not notice them all in your first viewing, it certainly makes the second watch through much more rewarding. And speaking of cast, this has a fantastic one. Now, I've already talked about Robert Montgomery a bit, but he really does a great job here. He definitely plays the meanest, most cynical Marlowe that I've ever seen, possibly a bit too much for the purist fans, as he's really quite different from any other portrayal I've seen of the character. But you eventually get a grasp of what Montgomery's trying to do with him, and I have to say it's pretty funny getting to see how others react to this more unlikable Marlowe. From people giving double takes to his wisecracks, to an entire Christmas party stopping dead in its tracks once he enters the room, I don't know if this is my favorite Marlowe, but it's certainly an entertaining one, and given the film's unique camera perspective, I think he kind of needs to be creating strong reactions in his co-stars, as we obviously can't see his face to know his. And now there are some moments of overacting for sure, but I think given all the technical challenges, the cast does a pretty excellent job of playing off what's essentially a camera and making it feel real. I mean, first you have Audrey Totter, who does a great job as Adrian Fromset, the editor who initially hires Marlowe and later becomes his love interest in the film. And she probably has the most scenes in Lady in the Lake other than Robert Montgomery, and given the circumstances, this must have been a huge challenge for her, but she comes away being one of the film's highlights. Lloyd Noland also does a wonderful job here as the shady Lieutenant DeGarment, who certainly seems to know a lot more about the case than he's letting on. And Tully is also great as the hard but well-intentioned Captain Kane. And it's also nice to see Leon Ames here as Mr. Kingsley, along with a very young Jayne Meadows here in one of her very first movie roles. So in short, though sure Lady in the Lake won't likely become everyone's new annual Christmas tradition, it's really a fascinating must-see for film noir fans, particularly lovers of Raymond Chandler's work who want to see something a little different this holiday season. So if you want to watch Lady in the Lake, it's available to rent or buy from all the usual places online. Though keep in mind, Apple TV recently put up a new miniseries also called Lady in the Lake that is not related, which makes searching up this film a little more difficult. So just make sure you specify the 1947 film. And if you want to get this film physically, you can get a very nice DVD of it from Warner Archive. Now sadly, there's no Blu-ray of it at the moment, but the restoration here looks very solid and includes the trailer and a nice commentary track as well. So I think it's still well worth picking up if you're interested. But now for my comment question, and I am wondering, what is your favorite film noir set at Christmas time? Though seemingly an unusual combination on the surface, there are a surprising amount of film noirs set during the holidays. It's always interesting to see how the filmmakers go about mixing in the holiday cheer with the hard-boiled crime story. So go ahead and put your favorites in the comment section down below and start discussing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video and subscribe if you want to see some more of these. Remember to keep watching movies and stay tuned because I will be back very soon with a much more traditional holiday classic for Christmas Day. So I'll see you then.
You'll see it just as I saw it. You'll meet the people, you'll find the clues, and maybe you'll solve it quick, and maybe you won't. You think you will, eh? Okay? You're smart. But let me give you a tip. You've got to watch them. You've got to watch them all the time. Because things happen when you least expect them.
3 days before Christmas and I haven't done a bit of shopping yet.
Well, you better hurry up.